Hello everyone, my name is Olivia, and today I wanted to recommend some haunting books, movies, and shows set by the ocean. And all of these books, movies, and shows have this haunting aura that is perfect to transition into fall because they're gloomy, they're desolate, they are just so dark, and I think this is the perfect time to recommend all of these stories. So let's get right into it. Let's start with the books because I have the most amount of books, then let's get into movies, and then I have one TV show that's set on the ocean that I think is absolutely fantastic. The first book that I have to recommend is based on a true story set in Iceland, so we are ready on an island, and it is Burial Rites. Burial Rites is a really slow-moving, dark, and gloomy read that will leave you holding your breath until the very end, and when you finish the novel, you're going to be like, what did I just read? Let me read you the first sentence of the synopsis because that immediately pulled me in. Agnes has been removed to her homeland's farthest reaches, to an isolated farm in northern Iceland to await execution. This is based on an actual execution that took place in Iceland. So we follow Agnes as she is sent to this farm to await her execution, and we follow her as she is reflecting on her life before all these events occurred, and she is also dealing with the family that is forced to take care of her against their will. They were told by the government they have to hold Agnes until her execution, so there is a lot of friction between Agnes and the people who are meant to take care of her because they know she is a criminal and they don't agree with her actions, but they find themselves getting a little bit closer to Agnes and getting to know her a little bit more and seeing her as more than just a person who committed a crime. But what's also interesting is that Agnes requests the company of a priest before her execution, and she requests a very specific man who's never met her before, and he goes out into this really isolated farm to go speak to Agnes, and he gets to learn more about her and really reckon with the gray area of sympathizing with someone who did something so heinous. This novel is very atmospheric, it's very slow moving, so if you're not a fan of slow reads, I wouldn't recommend it because it is a very slow story to unfold. But I think if you're a fan of exposition and a lot of introspection from all these different characters, you would enjoy Burial Rites because it's that type of novel that is a slow burning fire and it quickly ignites, and so many things occur that leave you absolutely shocked. And it's also really interesting because it's based on a true story. Another historical fiction that's based on a true story and is set by the sea is The Lamplighters. The Lamplighters is inspired by this one instance where three men who worked in a lighthouse disappeared without a trace. And it's interesting because when they disappeared without a trace, all the clocks in the lighthouse stopped at the same exact time. There's so many different theories that people have put out, but this author of The Lamplighters decided to fictionalize this entire mystery and really explore the lives of the three men who disappeared. So we follow two different timelines. We follow the men who work the lighthouse and the events that occur before their disappearance, and then we follow the women who are in relationships with these men years after their disappearance as they are talking to this man who is trying to investigate the mystery, and he's really bringing up a lot from their past as they are trying to heal from losing the men in their lives. I don't read a lot of mysteries because I never truly feel satisfied by the end result of them, but I found this to be a really well-rounded story that juxtaposed the men whose tensions are rising in this lighthouse because they're working in a very remote setting, and then we follow these women who come from very different walks of life and they're grieving in very different ways. And it's also difficult to grieve when you don't know what happened to the men in your life. And I also found it to be fascinating because this mystery really interests me and I liked the author's interpretation of what could have happened. And it was just a great story for fans of The Lighthouse. Another haunting story set by the sea is The Bass Rock. I also listened to this on audiobook, loved it so much that I had to get a copy from the publisher, so thank you so much to them. But The Bass Rock follows three different women from three different time periods, all centered around this one specific area in Scotland. So we follow Sarah, who is accused of being a witch back then. We follow Ruth, who has married into a family where she now has to not only become a wife, but also a stepmother after World War II. And then we follow Viv, who has recently lost her father, and she is going through Ruth's belongings and trying to learn more about her past while also exploring Viv's life in general. What I loved about this story was how all these different perspectives and time periods intertwined, and you can see how these women's actions and lives directly impact one another down a domino effect. And the different situations that these women had to go through were so haunting and relatable. This was a fantastic audiobook, but I also always say I really want to reread this novel because I want to go back and highlight so many different passages, because I remember listening to this story and being so impacted by their internal monologues and the way that they were reacting to so many different situations. This was a beautiful, beautiful story, very desolate, very quiet in its drama, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I most definitely want to see what this author is writing next, because this one was such a fantastic read. Next, I have two classic novels that are set by the sea. The first one isn't fully set by the sea. It's only like one part of the novel is set on the ocean, and it is Frankenstein. Before Frankenstein even begins, we read a few letters from a man named Robert who is on a ship going to the North Pole for an expedition. He is writing to his sister, and as the letters go on, he comes across a man who boards the ship and tells him the story of Frankenstein. So we come to the conclusion that this man who comes aboard is Victor Frankenstein. So from the moment you begin this novel, you are introduced into a story that is cold. It is empty, it is vast, it is just completely endless. I think it's the perfect way to start off this very atmospheric story that doesn't necessarily always take place on the sea, but it does have that certain element at the beginning of the novel that I think is so iconic, because Mary Shelley is so talented at setting a scene, and once you're there, you can practically feel the sea spray spraying at you while you're on this boat with Robert and with Victor. And Frankenstein overall is one of my favorite classic novels. I think it's one of the most accessible ones, because once you dive into the story, you can't really stop reading, and it has the mysterious aspect to it. It has this lush prose, but it also has this really gripping story that once you dive in, you won't want to put down, and it also feels much easier to read compared to other classic novels in terms of the prose. I think that Mary Shelley, because she wrote this at such a young age, has a very accessible type of writing style. And if you have not read Frankenstein, this is like the perfect season to pick it up, because this is truly such a fantastic story. Another accessible classic novel that is set on a remote island that I cannot recommend enough is In Then There Are None by Agatha Christie. If you are looking to get into Agatha Christie, or if you're looking to expand your classic novel horizons, I would highly recommend picking this up, because this one I read, I believe, in 8th grade, which was completely wild. But this mystery is delicious. It follows 10 people who are blackmailed into going to this remote island for a private affair for the weekend. And when they land on the island, they are told that their host is eventually going to meet them, but then a storm hits, and one by one, every single guest is being killed off in a way that matches a poem that is posted inside the house on the island to a T. And Then There Were None really utilizes its landscape to push the story forward. We are set on a remote island, people are unable to escape. There's also a storm brewing, so that also really affects them, because one can suggest, why not they build a boat to escape? Well, they can't, because a storm is brewing and it's very dangerous to go into the water. Agatha Christie is also really good at setting a scene and also building tension. And this story is completely haunting, because you don't know who is the killer, and you don't know who's also going to be next as a victim. And that's what pushes you forward when you're reading this story, and it really intrigues you and makes you want to go through this story as fast as possible, because the way that Agatha Christie can build up a mystery is superb. Let me share another book that is set on an island that I cannot stop thinking about, and it is The Memory Police. The Memory Police is set on an unnamed island off of an unnamed coast, following people who live in a world that is ruled by the Memory Police. The Memory Police has this very special ability to alter the memory of the citizens on this island. So let's say one day you don't remember what a light bulb is. You can look at the light bulb, but you don't know what its function is. You don't remember ever seeing it before. So if you don't remember it, why not throw it away? I'm going to read a little bit from the synopsis because they sum it up better than I can. And it says, when a young woman is struggling to maintain her her career as a novelist, she discovers her editor is in danger from the memory police, and she decides to hatch a plan to hide him in her house in the meantime. So people always pitch this as a novel for fans of 1984, and I do agree, but I think that the memory police is a lot vaguer than 1984, and I think it's a lot more ambiguous in your interpretations of what is happening, because this one's a little bit more rooted in this fictional concept of being able to alter the memories of others. And 1984 feels a little bit more concrete and realistic, but the memory police is such a haunting read because you are thrust into this dystopian environment that is set in a very remote landscape, and you see how the memory police is able to manipulate those on the island, because it reminds you how malleable memory can be as a collective society. We forget a lot of things as a society, and our memories can be manipulated by those around us. And I think it's so important to be aware of that, and the memory police explores that, what it's like to have your memories manipulated, what it's like to have a collective conscious as a society, and how that can be altered and manipulated and kind of twisted in the favor of a leader or a government. And the memory police was so fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I have to read more books by Yoko Ogawa because she's such a talented author, but this one is a story that you will not stop thinking about once you've finished it. Another book that I have not stopped thinking about since I read it years ago is Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. This one is also based on a true story inspired by the greatest maritime disaster in history, which is said in the synopsis. I'm not spoiling the book for you, but this is a YA novel that is following 4 different people from 4 different countries who are all coming together to try and get passage on the Wilhelm Gustloff as World War II is raging on. This story is a story where I can't really describe anything beyond that other than it's haunting. It is absolutely devastating, it is soul crushing, and it is so beautifully written. One of the most beautifully written young adult novels that I have ever read. And it's a story that I continually think about because I had to learn about this disaster through this novel, and I actually didn't learn about it in my history classes. And I'm really grateful to Ruta Sepetys for always shining a light on different areas of history that aren't as well known, because this story I cannot ever stop thinking about. Now let's move on to some haunting stories set by the ocean. So the first one that I want to recommend is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it is The Lighthouse. The Lighthouse is an A24 movie following 2 men named Thomas who are set to take care of this lighthouse for an extended period of time. And it is such a haunting film in the way that the story is told, filmed, and the way that the score just absolutely haunts you. It's a movie that's not for everyone, but if you love A24 movies and if you love feeling very unsettled by the environment that these movies create, you will love The Lighthouse, because it follows these men as they succumb to this madness because they are in such a remote setting and they are really grating against each other, and events occur that cause them to lose their minds even further, and you watch that descent into madness in real time in this film in a way that is done so seamlessly and beautifully. I cannot stop thinking about The Lighthouse since I initially saw it with my best friend and a literal stranger in the movie theater. It was just the 3 of us in that entire movie theater watching this movie for the first time ever, and we all finished watching that movie and we all looked at each other and we were like, what a movie. I cannot recommend The Lighthouse enough, one of my favorite movies of all time. But another movie set on a remote island about a man losing his mind is Shutter Island. Shutter Island is the peak psychological thriller. If you have not watched Shutter Island, I highly recommend you get some of your closest friends, you quiet down, pay attention to the details, and watch Shutter Island, because Shutter Island is one of the most intricate movies that I've seen in terms of rewatching it over and over again and always getting something new from the movie, because there are so many different details that are woven into this film that are so purposeful to make you second guess what is happening. And I also forgot to pitch Shutter Island to you. So Shutter Island follows a man named Teddy Daniels. He is a US Marshal, and he is going to this island called Shutter Island in order to investigate the disappearance of a patient who is in this hospital for the criminally insane. That's how they refer to it in the movie because this is set after World War II. So this is set during a time where mental health facilities were most probably making patients feel worse rather than helping them heal. And we follow Teddy Daniels as he is investigating this mystery, and he's also realizing that this hospital is more nefarious than he actually realized, and there's a lot hidden beneath the surface as to why this patient disappeared. Shutter Island is one of those movies that you will always get recommended if you are searching up mind-blowing movies, because the plot and the plot twists that occur in this movie that are so mind-boggling that every time I bring it up to a different person, everyone has a different theory of what they think happened in Shutter Island. And that's what I love the most about this film, because there are so many different ways that you can interpret it. There's so many different ways that you can digest the plot. It will haunt you mentally because you're going to try and figure out what really happened, but there's no right answer, and that's what makes it even more haunting. I forgot to say that Shutter Island is a novel, but I just prefer the movie to the novel because the visualization of a man losing his mind on this really remote island, I think it just hits a little bit harder through a film rather than through a novel. The novel is interesting, but I just prefer the movie, and it's also weirdly directed by Martin Scorsese. I feel like he never mentions the fact that he directed this movie, but it's really good and it's one of my favorite Martin Scorsese films, so I mean, I think you should watch it. Another movie that is also a book that I highly recommend is And Then There Were None. And Then There Were None has so many films, and I think they're all worth your watch if you're a really big fan of the novel. But the one that I'm talking about, and the one that I always talk about, is the BBC version. This is like a 3-hour film that was split into 2 parts that came to America and was played on Lifetime, which I think is a really interesting choice to make considering Lifetime is Lifetime. But this movie slaps in a way that is not spoken about enough. The way that this whole entire film plays out feels so anxiety inducing compared to the book, and you feel physically trapped with all these characters, and the island overall is absolutely beautiful, and the way that it plays a role in the story is just stunning. I would recommend any And Then There Were None adaptation. I want more Agatha Christie adaptations because all her stories are so compelling, and I love the play of having so many different characters interacting with one another, especially because they're also different personality-wise, and seeing that clash together in a film is absolutely delicious. And last but not least, I have a show recommendation that is set on the sea that is absolutely stunning, and nobody talks about it because you know what? Netflix canceled it like a week after it premiered. And that's what's so annoying about Netflix. They don't market any of their original content, and then a week after they let this content premiere, they cancel it without even giving it a chance to form an audience of people who want to see another season. And that's what I don't like about Netflix, and that's why I don't watch a lot of Netflix originals. But I decided to watch 1899 on a whim, and I finished it in like 2 days. 1899 follows a group of immigrants who are on a ship going from London to New York when they come across another ship in the ocean that is abandoned. And that's all I can give you about the plot, because the way that this story unfolds is so mind-boggling in a way that I wish we had more seasons to explore, because the concept overall was stunning, and it's also directed by the same people who made the show Dark. So I think hearing that the same creator of Dark created 1899, you can understand how wild this plot is and how it evolves from a simple historical fiction show into this sci-fi masterpiece that was so compelling, so interesting. One of my favorite things about the show, I'm trying to pitch this show to people because even though it's canceled, it's still worth the watch, trust me. 1899 follows so many different people on this boat, and what's really interesting is that all these actors speak in their native language. So you are hearing over 6 different languages in each episode in this show, and you are watching these characters as they are in their different areas of the boat, but over time they start interacting with one another and their stories start blending with one another, and you realize that they're all interconnected by this overarching plot that is so fascinating. It challenges your mind, it challenges your perception of time and reality, and it is a show that I think Netflix did not deserve, because Netflix has been putting out, I'm not even gonna say what Netflix has been putting out lately, but it's not good quality shows. And I think that 1899 was too big for Netflix to handle. And I think that they were intimidated by the scope that it had to become in future seasons that they canceled it. I think it ended in a way that was obviously open ended because you needed another season, but it ended in a way that was satisfactory to me. It ended in a way where I was like, okay, I could do this, I could deal with this ending, but it was so worth going through the journey of watching the show, not only to appreciate the beauty of language and the beauty of an international cast, but also to appreciate how intricate these creators are in terms of making dark. And in terms of making 1899, these creators are so good at crafting a very unique sci-fi story that doesn't get the attention that it deserves. And I hope they eventually make another amazing show because the way that their minds work in terms of time and reality is fascinating. So those are some haunting book, movie, and TV shows that are set either on the ocean or near the ocean. And I love the way that the ocean plays a role in each of these stories, whether it is to make sure that these characters are in a remote landscape that they cannot escape from, or it's to set this really gloomy tone that is necessary for the story to progress. Let me know if you have any book, movie, or TV show recommendations that are set by the ocean. It's a very niche recommendation video, but if you have made it to the end, I really appreciate it. Please leave an ocean-themed emoji down below so we can see who stays for the longest in all my videos. And if you have another niche book, movie, and TV show recommendation video idea that you would like to see from me in the future, please put them down below because I would love to take your video ideas into account. And again, if you have not followed me anywhere else on social media, especially on here, be sure to subscribe and follow me over on Instagram and TikTok. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video very soon.